Record. There we go. As I was saying, this is your opportunity to kind of ask questions about what we do here at Hayes Farm. Now that you're getting a little bit more familiar with the place, perhaps there are some questions that you want to have answered. And at the same time, I'd like to invite any ideas that you have about how we can proceed further down this community farm road that we're on, and perhaps any critiques that you might have. All very valuable stuff for us to kind of go forward with. So the first thing I want to talk about here is what is a community farm and what a community farm can offer to its community. So that's my first question there is what actually is a community farm? Has anybody heard of a community farm previous to joining up here at Hayes Farm?
Yeah, we have a community farm on the reserve.
Fantastic. Do you want to describe that one?
Well, everybody, we have a composter there. So everybody from the community drops off their compost there. It's a community compost. And then what we do is there's actually a couple community farms. There's one at the health center and one at the school, but they're only about 50 feet apart. But everybody goes and helps to weed. The farm, like the little gardens, they help weed in it and so on and so on. And then in the fall, everybody gets to go pick vegetables from it. And they kind of like you to take a picture with your vegetables that you harvest. So yeah, that's what we do.
How's that working out? Is people participating? Is it just volunteer? Is there any?
It's all volunteer, and the school is part of that too. The kids at the school help with that a lot.
Great.
Yeah. So it's a great system they have there.
Good. Are people keeping up on the farm work and the weeding and the harvesting and planting and all that kind of stuff?
Yes, they are.
Super great. Is there any like one human that spearheads those kind of plannings and when things need to get done, or is that again a community effort?
There's actually, yes, there is. There actually is two people. There's Stephanie Levesque at the community bill at the health center, and there's Bobby Joe Atway at the school, and she works with the kids with that, with gardening and stuff like that.
Awesome. Anybody else have any other examples of a community farm out there? Now, my question there that I threw out there about like, what is a community farm? I feel like if I was going to be honest with y'all, and I try to be honest with y'all, I feel that here at Hayes Farm, we're kind of still figuring that out. Would you agree to that, Claire?
Yep. Very much so. And I think I don't know that there's one definition. I think with this kind of model that we're trying to achieve, the definition is probably going to run the gamut, and one community farm is not going to look exactly like the next.
And as it should, right? Because the community farm needs to reflect the community, and no two communities are going to be the same either, and depending on where you're at. And we've definitely, our first year at Hayes Farm was in 2018. And we've definitely done a couple of pivots along the way and changed our direction a little bit anyway, and our focuses. I mean, we're still figuring it out. And I think we're still willing to make tweaks and changes as we go. And this is why your feedback and critiques are valuable to us, because we want to keep reflecting our community and not directing our community. There is this website that I came across. This is communityfarms.ca, based in British Columbia. And they have their own definition. As Claire was saying, there's like no one definition. And I kind of like that a whole lot. I like that about regenerative farming too. I like that there's more than one definition. I think the humans try to boil things down too simplistically sometimes and just have that one statement about what this is. And I often find I don't fit into boxes like that so well. So I like having it a bit open-ended in what a community farm is. This here example in British Columbia, they talk about a community farm being a multifunctional farm where the land is held in trust for a community rather than owned privately. And on this community farm, this here is, they talk about the lands that are being shared by a community of farmers, and with the primary focus of the community farm being local food production using sustainable agricultural practices. At Hayes Farm, we bring in that teaching element, of course, too. So in addition of producing local food using sustainable agricultural practices, we're also trying to provide skills for folks to go out and replicate and start up more community farms in and around their respective areas. I think the biggest thing about this here write-up about community farms coming from this British Columbia group are the addressing of the challenges that faces farmers and communities. Let's see what they have to say in that challenge. They talk about bylaws and policies and working together and protecting farmland and housing and unfair advantages and other challenges. But as somebody that grew up in suburbia there in South Windsor, Ontario, I never had farming. Well, farming has been broken in my family. If you go back far enough, we could find some farmers, but there was no farmers in the last few generations of my family, and I grew up in suburbia. And getting access to farmland has always been a challenge throughout my entire life as I've been trying to go down this agricultural road. And to be honest, I've never grown. I've never owned farmland. In the Kawarthas there, I was managing my wife's family's farm, owned by my father-in-law. And he was generous enough to let us have some of the farmland to do our thing, but we can't say we ever owned it. I certainly don't own the Hayes farm where we do farming over there. The only time I've ever owned land, and I'll put that in air quotes because it's weird to own land in unceded territory, is currently right now at Crocs Point Road, the 1.5 acres that I'm on. And while it's certainly doing a homesteading thing out here, I don't know if you'd be exactly be able to call it a farm. So myself, that was one of the big challenges and barriers to participating in the farming, that local organic farming movement, is just accessing farmland. And that's a huge barrier in and of itself, especially in Ontario there, where I spent most of my life. Land prices are getting more and more and more expensive all the time. And owning land is a very difficult thing. Although there is quite a bit of land out there, and it's a matter of kind of networking with people and having access to some of this land. And a lot of folks are eager to have folks farm their farmland. A trend I noticed in Ontario, though, this is going back a few years, but there were folks that were buying up land in and around the Kawartha Lakes area just as a property investment in order to sell it again into the future. And a lot of those folks were looking for people to farm that land in the meantime, and often using organic or sustainable techniques. But you knew into the future that that was an investment for them and they're eventually going to sell it. And so it makes it challenging to farm this land that you know you only have access to for X number of years. As you know, with farmland, you're constantly making, especially doing the organic, sustainable, regenerative thing, you're always making improvements to that land. And it's a bit of a heartbreak when that's kind of taken away from you after all those years. So accessing land is certainly a challenge. Anybody else can speak to any other challenges of getting into farming from like a zero farming background? Go ahead, Claire, you got something? You're about to say something? No?
Yeah. The land access story, conversation, picture, whatever you want to call it, is very similar around here to what you were talking about in Ontario. I think in the last year or two, the land prices for sure are kind of skyrocketing compared to what they have been. But that succession picture, or not even necessarily succession of a farm being passed down to the next generation or to the next person, whatever the case may be, is one thing. The access to land, of which we know there's so much farmland or unused land in this province, But how it gets, you know, how you get access to that, it's a similar picture here, that in my opinion, it's all about networking, which can be difficult. Like if you're not in the agriculture community, how do you start? How do you, you know, it's nerve-wracking to drive around and knock on somebody's door, especially if you're, you know, new to that kind of landscape.
Yeah, and to gain that trust, right? That's a whole other thing. You kind of got to be in and around the farming community for a couple of few years before people start making offers. But once you are, those offers do come in. But it's that building of the trust in the first place. Tom, I see a hand up.
So another option for cheap land, if you're not looking for anything specific, the government of New Brunswick has a surplus website. Surplus property website, and you could get acre land for, what was it,
5,000?
was it like 1,500 was what we paid for ours?
Yeah, well,
yeah, you could get like an acre of land for dirt cheap. It's not great, some of them, and it's kind of hard to go through. Like you might find something one week and then it's gone the next day. But you might find listings that'll sit there for a year. You know what I mean? A lot of them are really good. We got an acre out in Bluebell Mountain, just off of the lake. And we paid like $1,500 for it. I mean, there's nothing on the property. It was a rundown camp, but it's a nice property. It's got good water.
Fiddlehead.
Yep, Fiddleheads. That's actually where Ursula wants to start her Fiddlehead farm. But anyways, that's all I wanted to share.
Cheap property.
You want to share that link maybe?
Sure, I'll look for it.
Super great. And then in addition to the land, then you're looking at commodities of scale, right? Whether you like it or not, those big farms that are out there are the ones that are setting the prices. And potato farms is an example I always come back to. The big potato farms are operating with big machinery, and they have that commodity of scale. And so they're able to sell potatoes at $20 for a 50-pound bag, or sometimes even cheaper than that, and still make a profit. Whereas if you were trying to compete against that as a startup farm, and you're out there with your digging fork and your hoe to trench potatoes and put them in, and that's what we do at Hayes Farm, of course, it's very hard to compete with other farms in that commodity of scale. So that's another challenge too. And yeah, we'll get more into that in a little bit. But that's another challenge that is often faced by farms. And then just as we were seeing on the website that we were just on, or maybe you're still on, I think I'm still sharing that one, is the regulations and policies is another one that often folks stumble on a little bit. And an example with that is eggs. A lot of folks that want to start raising chickens and selling eggs, what you're thinking of is that small little flock, or maybe even a large little flock, but out on pasture often, sometimes not. But you're not thinking of that commodity of scale that you're competing against. And as I was describing before, like modern egg laying facilities now, they're not just a barn full of chickens. They're a barn that's full of chickens that are stacked on top of each other. So for every floor of that barn, you have essentially 4 floors of chickens. And when you start to think about getting into the egg business, that's not what you're thinking of doing. But in order to remain profitable, that's what farms do nowadays in order to achieve that commodity of scale and be able to sell eggs at $3 a dozen and still make money.
We spend $50 a month.
Yeah.
Oh.
Say that again there, Tom.
Sorry, I was talking to Ursula. I was like, I like our profitability. We sell like $75 eggs a week, but we spend like $50 a month.
That's
exactly, I mean, it's
right.
not big profits, but hey, I like it.
And in order to make like a full-time living off that kind of thing, it becomes difficult competing against that commodity of scale. So these are kind of things that the community farm is trying to address, trying to make accessible land to folks and trying to help out with those kind of that challenges of scale. As I was saying, we're still kind of figuring out what that community farm model.
I accidentally put sugar in your tea. I was like making my coffee, and then I was just like scooping and listening to Mark and Tom, and then I just looked down. I'm like, whoops. There's a little bit of sugar in there, and
Tom,
I hope it's not too sweet.
Tom, you're not muted.
Oh. Yeah, I'm making tea.
So then, we were speaking about these challenges that the community farm's trying to address. So then my next question for y'all is, what can a community farm offer to its community? Obviously, some places are offering land for folks to farm on and equipment that can be shared. And of course, you got the fresh, local, organic foods that it can offer to its immediate community. And often community farms are offering these fresh, local, organic foods to folks that would not otherwise be able to access these kind of things. Here at Hayes Farm, we're also offering training and educational experiences and volunteer opportunities. And then with our open farm days that we do monthly, we try to offer inspiration too, to get people motivated to try to grow their own food. I'm wondering if there's anything else out there that you guys can think of that a community farm can offer to its community.
I know it hasn't been the focus of Hayes, but I've heard of some farms being kind of like a healing place for folks, like the skills based, but also kind of like maybe a bit beyond like specifically farming skills, but like life skills and kind of just like a safe space for people. I think there was a farm somewhere in New Brunswick that's been doing that with maybe folks who had been incarcerated or something. But that's something I think is super cool.
Healing space and green space is what I wrote down in my own little personal notes out of that. Hayes Farm has gone down that road a little bit ourselves. We have taken in folks that are transitioning out of the Canadian military, for example, and obviously they have had some PTSD, post-traumatic stress through the Canadian military. And like we had one fella a couple years back who just found a lot of solace, I guess you can say, in harvesting herbs. And he used to harvest all of our herbs whenever it came to harvest day around our place. And he just used to love it, and you can see it on him, and it's wonderful. So yeah, Healing Place is a fantastic one that I missed. Thank you, Julia. And that green space, just a green space, especially a community farm within the city, just to be able to offer a little bit of green space that folks can come and unwind and hang out in. And something else that we tried to do once but didn't get much traction, and then COVID came, is a bit of a community gathering space. And there was a talk at one time with Milda's building a pizza oven on the farm in order to kind of further that along. And I know that there are several different community farms that do have pizza ovens as part of their operation, and just a great spot for the community to gather and use a pizza oven, like a cob style pizza oven.
Yeah, I think that the healing space and that one is a really important and really good idea. I think at Hayes we've had to be pretty, tread lightly on that one because it's not an area of expertise for us, and making sure that though we're open to that, making sure that we're not promoting it as something that we can excel in or have lots of structure around, just because it's not where our expertise lies. But being open, I guess, is kind of our approach there. And what was the other thing I wanted to say? Oh, yeah, I think Mark, you kind of mentioned it in terms of the open farm days and the education. But I think a big role that we're trying to fill at Hayes is being like an access point for folks, you know, especially where our setting is right inside the city, or, you know, very accessible, and kind of being that introduction or that access point for people who are just curious even about, you know, what farming or growing food could look like, and to try and be a bit of a you know, though we're not a demonstration farm, being able to showcase what the capacity and abilities are, I think, is one of our big goals.
And while Hayes Farm doesn't offer land to people, well, a little bit, I guess, we're getting into that a little bit with that incubator plot that Sinead is managing. We're able to offer a little bit of land to folks, especially graduates in particular, who we're focusing on, to be able to start up their own farm operation. But Hayes Farm has come out a New Brunswick Community Harvest Garden. That is like our umbrella parents kind of company, I guess you can say, which is a nonprofit organization. And that New Brunswick Community Harvest Gardens, they offer community garden plots in a couple of different areas on the north side here in Fredericton. So that is something else that we do offer as well, is community garden plots through the New Brunswick Community Harvest Garden. And this question here that I'm asking y'all about what can a community farm offer to its community, we have tried to engage the wider Hayes Farm community in order to hear thoughts. And last year, at around this time, maybe it was into June, we tried to hold a design session in order to hear more thoughts from the community and find out what the community needs out of Hayes Farm. And so those are things that we try to do and reach out to the wider community. That design session didn't work out the way we wanted it to because of COVID last year at this time. But it's something I'd like to revisit into the future, maybe post-COVID. But out of that design session, one of the things that kind of rose to the surface was coming up with demonstration ideas of that folks can replicate in their own backyard, especially if they're dealing with like urban areas and urban areas that might not be fantastic to grow in. And so that's where that lasagna garden came from, is just an attempt to show people that, you know, if you have an area that is marginal soil, perhaps you can consider building up on it as opposed to planting directly into it. And then within that same kind of thinking, that's our ideas behind those potato towers too, which need to be planted, by the way. Those potato towers, they're ready to be planted at any time. That entire riding ring area has been kind of designated to come up with more ideas and more inspirational ideas of how folks can grow in their backyards, especially if they're dealing with marginal areas. And that addition of the living wall planter fits very well into that too. It's another idea about how to grow foods in marginal areas. Does anybody else have anything to add to that question of what can a community farm offer to its community? Because I am taking notes and these are all good stuff.
Okay, my hands up. Did you guys ever wonder about renting little plots for people to have their own community gardens? Like, you know how we have our own field plot blocks? Because like a lot of people that are in the city, and I'm seeing now, they don't have no land to do a little garden, and they might want to have a garden. So like you could have like a space that they can have like, I would say Cindy's field block or Jamie's field block, and they have a little, they can buy that little space, rent it just for the year.
Right, and that's exactly, well, they're on a smaller scale. That's exactly what the Marysville Community Garden is about. I'm gonna see if I can get a picture up about that one. And then there's also the community garden real close to us on the Anglican Church on, help me out, the street there, Claire.
McAvoy.
What's that? McAvoy?
Yeah, so during those two community gardens, the plots at the church garden are a bit smaller than the ones in Marysville, but they're run like a, you know, it is a typical community garden. I think the plots in Marysville are 4 by 10. They're really nice size. And those 2 gardens are run by, like Mark was saying, NB Community Harvest Gardens, which is operates Hayes Farm as well. But yeah, there is, I mean, that conversation about having larger plots available is on the radar. It's a bit tricky to incorporate here. Maybe it's not, but that incubator plot that Sinead is working, I think is our good first step there. And we'll see how that goes and then build on that, hopefully.
Yeah, and then being able to bring folks together in these plots to exchange ideas and share equipment, that's all fantastic stuff too. I think our challenge at Hayes Farm with doing something like that is just the actual space. We don't have a ton of space there. It looks like a large farm on a map and that, but our actual like growing space is not huge, but it's big enough for us to work with, that's for sure. And here's a picture of that Marysville Community Garden, and you guys are welcome to check that out at any time. That's right behind the old cotton mill in Marysville. This is when that building was still there, but it got taken down last fall. And like I was saying, there's that one at the church just around the corner. And there will probably be opportunities as the season. We do manage a plot. Our Hayes Farm manages a plot at the Marysville Community Garden currently, and there will be opportunities for us to go visit that as the season goes on. So in addition to that community farm aspect of providing those fresh local organic foods and volunteer experiences and healing space and green space and community gathering space and things that we were just talking about, Hayes Farm, of course, also offers training and teaching opportunities. We have our regenerative farming internship, which is the 18-week program that everybody's currently in. And then we also have the 30-week program, what we call the regenerative full farming internship. And that stretches all the way into November. In September to November, we run what's called the Holistic Farm Business Planning course. And the folks that are taking the 30-week course will that's what you're looking at from that September to November piece, whereas the 18-week folks will be leaving us at the end of August. And then in the winter, in February and early March, we also host, we did all this online last year, but we host something that's called the Growers Guild Discussions, and that is a no-cost, free discussion period. I don't know what you want to call it. We call it the Growers Guild. And we'll pick, last year we had 4 different topics, and I'm trying to remember the topics. One was growing seasonally in New Brunswick. One was, oh man, I'm blanking on my topics. Anyway, we have 4 different topics. We've hosted different topics over the years about how to source and source different suppliers and different equipment. Last year we also had one on potentially building a co-op in Fredericton area and what that might look like in order to aggregate everybody's goods in one spot and then sell them from there. Anyway, we do these grower guild discussions in the off season to try to engage more folks. So those are the different teaching and training opportunities we offer here at Hayes Farm. I'm also interested, as you guys are getting more familiar with Hayes Farm, I'm also interested in hearing if you have any ideas about different training and teaching opportunities that we might want to look into.
Allie, you had something that you were going to share earlier. Did you still want to share that?
Yeah, sure. And it can kind of tie in with this too. But the one thing that I think is really cool about the farm and really just kind of pulled me towards it was there's a difference between cultivating something around a product and cultivating something around a lifestyle. And I think what's so cool I've been in a space where I've tried to curate a space for a community to happen around a product. And it's sometimes hard because you always try to include that one product and you have to have a neat idea or vision for something, but somehow add in the product with it so that you can use that space to make those two things coincide. But what's cool about the farm is it more advocates and more like the product is kind of like the lifestyle, which can move into so many different avenues. And so I think it's just so exciting to think of the different ways that Hayes Farm could serve the community. Can just always change and always be evolving. And I always have a hard time narrowing down like the things I love to do, because I'm like, oh, just everything's so interesting to me. And the fact that like farming, like you can do all the things you love with it like encompassed in that. And I was just like, that's what really drew me in, was the lifestyle of what farming is, rather than like the product of like the good food that comes from the ground and stuff. And so that was something I just wanted to add to the last question you asked, Mark. But then also moving into this question is, I have such a heart for like young people that are like just leaving high school and they're starting to discover the big world, and realizing that you have to go grocery shopping and realizing that you have to like provide for yourself. And so I just think that if Hayes Farm, and this is not a dig at Hayes, but if Hayes Farm was at Leo Hayes at a university fair, I would have never looked at it because I'd never really thought about, like good things take time. I should learn how to do, like, that's going to be important to me to really care about where my food comes from. And so I just think like the ways that we could partner with high schools in the city and with young people, so that at a young age, instead of them kind of growing their desire for convenience, they grow an absolute like love for learning how good things take time. And so I always think that everything starts in schools and everything starts with young people. And so to like be really in partnership with like teenagers in high school and the different high schools in our city, I feel like that would be so beneficial for young people to be like, oh, like this is what it's supposed to be like. So that's all I have to say.
So I got a couple of things to say about that. When we started out at Hayes Farm in 2018, one of our goals was at that time to create agripreneurs. And we pivoted from there because it became obvious to us that not everybody that wants to take this course wants to get into growing food for a living. However, a lot of folks that do take this course want to grow food for themselves or be involved in some way in food security and that and food sovereignty. My phone's ringing. I got to take this. It might be my 811. Claire, do you got anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I can carry on here. Yeah, so when we started the program 2018, like Mark was just saying, we were the vision that kind of we were rolling with at the beginning, and the feasibility study that we did to make sure that the project, you know, was going to be relevant and be interesting and be of use to people around us. We were focused on the idea of training people to you know, be on the verge of being ready to start their own operation when they left, a farm operation when they left their time at Hayes. And so that first season in 2018, we did do a full season program. So similar to what we're doing again this year, we brought it back. The 30, I think it was 30 or 32. I think it was a 30-week program. And that was one of the big pivots we made after that first year. So an effort to kind of create farmers. And then going through that first year, realized that we had quite a small cohort. There was only 6 of us. But realized that there's so much interest without, you know, in the lifestyle, in the food production, in the community, and all the different aspects of what is happening at Hayes Farm, without necessarily wanting to then go on and pursue a, you know, quote unquote for-profit farm operation. And so that was one really big pivot between our first and second years. And then in our second year was the first time that we had university interns join us for the program, and that was the vast majority of our cohort in 2019. And of course, you know, folks who are coming to us from university doesn't, you know, I'm not implying at all that you're not really interested in being here, just recognizing that, you know, if you're enrolled in university, you're pursuing a degree and you likely, you know, already have some vision of another plan that likely isn't farming. But that the kind of our approach and what we're interested in and what we're trying to teach is more of a like whole system and kind of bigger picture approach. And so I like to say when I'm when I'm introducing people to what we do and talking about the program, is that though it is very skills oriented, and you know there's obviously lots of in field time and lots of hands-on stuff, is that we include a lot of the environmental and social context of agriculture and farming in what we're doing. So, you know, if somebody, we're trying to be relevant and interesting for people who, you know, don't necessarily want to go in and start a farm after being here, but can kind of bring that learning and that context with them into whatever they are pursuing. So I'm thinking, you know, like specifically in this cohort, like Jessica and Zach and Leah, who are in post-secondary and pursuing a degree of some kind, you know, that's awesome if you want to, after doing this course, you decide you want to be a farmer, but we also totally recognize that that's probably not the case, but that hopefully, you know, what you get out of being here with us is things that you can still apply to whatever that degree is, and for everybody else, you know, to whatever that path is, even if you don't decide to, you know, invest your time and your energy into a farm operation of some kind. Did you get your appointment, Mark?
It was weird, man. They called me up and then they gave me the option of leaving my number so they can get back to me. And I was like, all right, why call me? But anyway, so I'm still waiting.
All right.
I see both Doreen and Dallas has a hand up.
Oh, I already did mine. I just forgot to put it down.
Dallas?
I was just gonna point out that at Hayes, like you guys have kind of expanded a little bit more into like the education section of like this community aspect of having a farm, right? And I think that's what I enjoy about Hayes in general. There's more of like that educational approach, which makes it a lot easier to kind of like feel like you can come in, you have that access to it. I guess in the perspective of creating a community, you know, farms are kind of the baseline, like you need to be able to feed people, but, you know, educating people is just as important. You know, liberating people with knowledge is, you know, a huge part of creating a strong foundation in that community. And that ties into what Ali was saying about like creating the opportunity for kids to learn about like where their food comes from, and, you know, having a better understanding of like, you know, where you get your food matters, you know.
And right, like similarly, I know a lot of folks that have gone through like chef school, but never wanted to work in kitchens and don't work in kitchens. They just use that experience to get into a broader food kind of world and food security and food sovereignty type issues out of going to chef school too. Very similar to that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How did you guys, like, in the process of like doing Hayes Farm, how did you narrow down kind of like your main visions to be like what it is in having this like what we're doing now? Like, how did you guys go through that process of deciding like what you really wanted to put out there for us to like sign up and do and things like that?
It's definitely an evolution.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Claire. You look like you're about to talk.
No, I was going to say the exact same thing. And I guess to bring it back to the very beginning a little bit, I mean, like Mark was mentioning, having that established nonprofit of NB Community Harvest Gardens with an existing mission and existing kind of values and ideals helps to set the tone for sure. And I mentioned it briefly, but the kind of the step one for this project was we got funding for a feasibility study. So, you know, there was like assessing the piece of land and kind of talking to the community and involving the city and kind of looking into all these pieces to make sure that the project on a whole was, you know, was a worthy thing to pursue and something that would make sense in this setting. But, you know, as a team, we had a steering committee that was, you know, it changed through the individuals on it changed over the course of, you know, the couple years developing the project as things do. But there was, you know, quite a long discussion over several months, and it does continue to come up, like developing that, like the mission and the goal, basically, and setting out what our values are in terms of an organization and a project. And if it's we have a whole page that, I mean, I don't want to be one of those people that says just read our website, but there is a whole page on our website about what our values and our mission and our goals are. And it's that too is something that is not set in stone. I mean, we try and it comes up a couple times a year, you know, when we're trying to look at new things come up, or we're trying to make decisions about whether or not to pursue something or how to do something, and we do refer to that there. They definitely, it helps to guide us. But on the kind of on the flip side, I don't quite know how to approach it, but there has been instances of like, maybe, you know, do we need to review what our mission is? Like, is there something here that's just doesn't fit anymore with kind of where we're going and what we're doing? So it's definitely, you know, you want to be conscious that you're not kind of changing your mission to fit a project that like presents itself. I don't know if I'm now just rambling and not answering your question, but
well, we've certainly pivoted though. In 2018, when we first started out, again, we were trying to create those agripreneurs. That was the goal to start with, and that's the kind of context and framework that I was brought into as well here. And but then after that 2018 season, we made a switch well, first of all, in 2018, we were doing a farmer's market. We were doing the Garrison Night Market. And we were also doing restaurant sales as well in Fredericton, and then also operating a CSA. But then after that season doing that, we actually, from listening to our community, and Claire is part of the National Farmers Union, so she's able to communicate and get feedback from different people that are out there in the farming community. And we actually had a little bit of pushback from the farming community local to Fredericton here, that were concerned about Hayes Farm taking up some of the market share by being present at these farmers markets and selling to restaurants and offering a full price CSA. So after 2018, we made that bit of a pivot, and then we moved to that pay what you can model, and then started working with partner agencies in order to find folks that would have obstacles in accessing the types of foods that we were providing, and trying to break down those obstacles. And that pay what you can model certainly helped out with that. And ever since we made that pivot, I haven't heard any more grumblings from the bigger farming community that we were taking up market share. What about you, Claire?
No, I agree.
And so then I really like that about Hayes Farm, that we're able to make that pivot. I put up on screen there our Hayes Farm mission statement there. Everybody can read about that. And I do, when I'm doing my off-season planning, I do come back to this mission statement and make sure that my plans fit the mission statement. But as Claire was saying, you got to be flexible to be able to revisit and change that mission statements too, in order to reflect your community.
And something I will mention here now too is that we haven't done one yet, but about once monthly, Matthew and I we haven't figured out exactly how we're going to do it yet, but we try to do regular feedback with all of you as we go through the program, and then kind of a bit more in depth at the end, because this is like an ever evolving but also co-creative process. And so We think that all of you who are participating in this have also a big role to help develop that and shift it into whatever direction it makes sense to be taking it. So even coming down to what topics are included in the curriculum, it's changed, not a ton, but there's things that we've taken out of the curriculum and things that we've added based on, you know, what the interests tend to be.
Right. So this is kind of a feedback session is what we're kind of getting at right here. And trying to answer your questions about what we do and how we do it around here.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. With the NFU getting all pissy, is that because you guys have like grant
I never said
funding?
that, by the way. I never said they got all pissy.
No,
Okay.
no. So I heard that. No. So like, is it because Hayes was receiving like grant funding and so they thought it wasn't fair? Or are they gonna like, you know, because like if a new farmer wants to start a new CSA in New Brunswick, isn't the NFU or NBFU supposed to like support them? Or are they just like, oh, your new competition? Like, is it because you guys were such a unique structure that they didn't like it, that you were entering the for-profit market? Like, can you just speak a bit more to that?
Yeah, for sure. And it was not the NFU as an organization. It was actually one specific operation that shared the opinion, and just kind of, I guess we as Hayes Farm just basically extrapolated that, like to just look at it from more of like a whole systems perspective as opposed to just taking this one farm's opinion. But I think it was pretty much exactly what you just asked there, Julia. Like we were at a farmer's market and we were selling a very, you know, typical CSA, like a weekly model, and we had set a price for it. But I think the rub was there's kind of two things. One was a perception. Oh, thanks, Mark. Yeah, National Farmers Union. One was the perception of that we weren't, from a programming perspective, we weren't doing what we set out to do, which I think was just a bit of ignorance. I think there was like just not enough information in that aspect. But the other one being exactly that, like market share threat, where we as a nonprofit do have access to public funding streams and grants, which is, we say we have access to it, and it's like a very, very major part of how we are able to operate. And I know, Mark, you have we'll be talking about that more. And of course, for-profit operations aren't able to access those public funding streams. And so it was kind of, I think a bit people, or this operation in particular, and then one could assume other operations that were, you know, trying to make their living from farming, seeing this nonprofit organization come in and being able to set lower prices because we have access to grant money, was threatening. And yeah, so I think that these other farms, or this farm, that farm being the one that voiced their concern, you know, we listened to that and just kind of shifted in a way that made sense for our community, and I think helped address that problem. And that really was the pay what you can model, but through our partner organizations. So we work with I think we're up to about 5 organizations now that help us distribute CSAs to their clientele. And so that's kind of a bit of a unique partnership that's, I think, helped ease things a little bit with those other operations.
And this is something I have seen before, and also a great segue into the next little piece that I wanted to talk about, which was other community farm operations. And I wanted to pick everybody's collective brains here about if anybody knows of any other community farm operations. But back when I was selling in Toronto at the Brickworks Farmers Market, there was an organization called Everdale. And they were also selling at the Brickworks Farmers Market, and there was pushback against Everdale. Everdale is also a training farm where people pay to learn how to operate a farming operation, mostly through that for-profit kind of lens, as far as I understand about Everdale. There is pushback at that market because there is that perception that, hey, here's this farm that essentially has not only free labor, but labor that is paying the farm in order to learn how to farm. And there is that perception that it was like an unfair advantage with Everdale. I don't know exactly where that's at in that whole Toronto kind of farmers market scene, but that is something that we tried to address at Hayes Farm to not have that perception that we have that unfair advantage. And then that's another reason that we started exploring alternative models to distribute our produce. And we also recognize that we only have so much farmland and there's only so much produce that we can produce. And so we our greater benefit is not just the production, because we won't be able to feed all of Fredericton from our farm, but our greater focus is being able to inspire and teach other folks how to do their own little thing, and to produce food for themselves and their own immediate community. I'm trying to keep up on chat here. What were we talking about?
I felt like I didn't super answer Julia's question, so I'm just trying to.
And so, yeah, that's my question to you guys is, do you guys know of other community farms out there in Canada or North America? And I've got you started with Everdale. There is also the Tsawwassen First Nation Farm School out in British Columbia. And there's a place called Martha's Farm in Nova Scotia. They're affiliated with some sort of abbey or convent. Nuns are associated in that one somehow or another. I don't know too much about Martha's, but they have a Facebook link, which I'm not on. So then I often get kicked off here. But anyway, that is another one that exists. And these are places that we have, or some of these anyway, that we've reached out to in order to get a little bit of inspiration and kind of align with a little bit. Does anybody else know of any other community farms or teaching farms out there in North America or beyond?
Go ahead.
Go down.
Somebody have something there?
It's all you.
I was just gonna say there's one that I follow and I really love it. It's called the Ecology Center and it's in California. And it's amazing. And their social media is quite impressive as well. They keep up with that in a really awesome way. But they also have like an internship and they have a lot of different kinds of things going on their farm. And they're really cool to read up about and get on their newsletter and stuff.
Did you call that the Ecology Center?
Yeah, the Ecology Center. It's I don't know how to say it, but it's in Capistrano, California. St. John, Capistrano, California. Not that. No, that's not it.
Oh,
no.
Right. That's a new one to me. I'll need to.
Actually, wait. If you go on, like their Instagram is, I'm not really on their website much. I'll put the link in the chat.
Whatever you found there, Mike, that looks interesting though.
Yeah, for sure. Then I need to look into that one a bit more. That's new to me. There's also Blue Hill Farm in New York. They're a pretty dreamy kind of place. They're funded by the Rockefellers, like literally. they have invested quite a bit into this farm, and it started out with actually a restaurant, Blue Hill Restaurant, and this farm supplies that restaurant. And they do different experimental farming there and develop new vegetables, and they also do teaching as well. An interesting place, but again, in that scale of economy and that scale and that larger kind of scale, it's hard to compete with, the Rockefellers.
That's associated with Stone Barn Center, right?
Yeah, that's the other name I'm looking for. Thank you.
Also, they have on Chef's Table on Netflix. There's an episode where what's his name? Where they go over Blue Hill Farm and the restaurant. And so he talks to the guy who owns it. Mark one second. So on Netflix, it's called Chef's Table, and they have this whole episode on it, and they talk all about it, and it's a really little 45-minute episode.
But I get the impression with a lot of these places as well, they're kind of figuring out as they go. The Deanery Project, yeah, I know about that one as well. I gotta keep up here. I gotta make some notes.
Yeah, Nova Scotia's got some cool stuff going on for sure.
I mean, Fallsbrook Center is more of an education center, I guess. It's more based around educating people on food systems and environmental, issues. But they're another one in New Brunswick.
I don't think they actually have land though anymore, do they?
I'm not sure. That's the thing. They moved. Last time I knew about them, they moved to a different location. But
yeah. I think they're more. I think they're operating quite remotely now. I haven't really kept up on them, so I could be wrong. But
you said in North America, the state of Chiapas is completely in Mexico is completely self-sustaining on coffee.
Julia put up that folk school, which is a super neat spot, and we'll be diving further into that when we have a class on alternative economies in action, and that folk school will be explored much further at that point. But that folk school project is pretty neat to me too. I like that a whole lot. All right, fleshing out my list here a whole lot more, and that's great. I don't want to spend too much more time in that category, though. I want to refocus here on Hayes Farm. As I was saying, New Brunswick Community Harvest Garden was well established there prior to Hayes Farm being started up, and they had a community built already, which gives us a significant head start. And also of very high significance is the nonprofit status that New Brunswick Community Harvest Gardens had already established for themselves. So the instant Hayes Farm was started, we fell under their umbrella and we were a nonprofit farm just like that. But to become a nonprofit is a bit of paperwork and a little bit of time and going back and forth with the government. You need to set up a board with voting rights, and there's all. Claire, can you talk more about starting up a nonprofit? I'm not sure if I'm so good at that.
I have never been involved in starting up a nonprofit, so I don't know how much I can help here. But yeah, so NB Change was established in 2010. So they've been around for more than 10 years now. And I mean, I know a little bit about the nuts and bolts, but I don't know anything about establishing it. But yeah, a board. Need a board. I don't know. I can't talk about it.
I can talk about it vaguely, but I don't know how accurate my information would be if I was to get into this. But a tip here, though, that I wanted to offer is if you are looking at starting up a community farm into the future, that was an excellent arrangement for Hayes Farm. And perhaps there are other like-minded nonprofit organizations that would want to kind of take you on under their wing a little bit. Having that nonprofit status certainly helped out Hayes Farm in several different ways, and we'll get into that in a second. But my question to you guys is, do you think a community farm needs that nonprofit status? Can you operate a community farm without nonprofit status?
I do know that in order to access all like the public funding, you have to be a nonprofit. So I guess you could do it without it, but you would need that community to have some funding to, you know, start the project, because everything costs money to get going.
Absolutely.
There's a whole bunch of other categories in most public funds that we apply for usually anyways. And I'll do a quick search on what those typically are. Nonprofit status definitely tends to be always on the list, but it's certainly not the only option. So just give me a sec here and I'll see if I can dig something else up.
And when Matt's talking about accessing funding, we're talking more like kind of governmental level funding or like-minded organization type funding. And those like-minded organizations are often charities or nonprofits of themselves. And I do have a bit of a list I will share of our different funders of Hayes Farm over the years. But towards my question of, do you need to be nonprofit in order to have a community farm? I wanted to share this with you and get your thoughts on this one. Have you guys heard about this? Agri-hoods, whereas, you know, 10, 20 years ago, different subdivisions were being built around man-made lakes. So people are man-made ponds or whatever, so people can feel all rural and pastoral where they live, and they have this nice little pond and this and that, and whole subdivisions were being created around these man-made lakes. A new push, and especially in the US, are agri-hoods, where whole subdivisions are being created around a farm. And I see positives and negatives around this. But before I influence your thoughts, I wanted to hear if anybody heard about these agri-hoods and how you feel about these agri-hoods. So specifically, maybe let's start talking about positives. If you have a whole neighborhood, a whole subdivision that is literally around a farm, and this is another trend previous, like to the lake thing, where people were making man-made lakes and having houses built around them. The trend previous to that was golf courses, right? A golf course would be established, and all these nice houses would go around the golf course, and there'd be some pretty high-end houses, and they would have access to all this green space in their backyard if they paid the membership fee. And so that's like another building designer trend, where agri-hoods are similar to that. Instead of having that big golf course that all these houses are ringed around, you have a farm that all these houses are ringed around. So can anybody think of positives around agri-hoods?
Right.
No complaints about your animals.
Very good. And it certainly can be an educational experience for kids growing up. They know where their food comes from and how food is produced. Another positive. And places like this hire farmers, another positive, that have no, otherwise would not perhaps have access to land. You all of a sudden have an instant farm created, and they are looking to hire a farmer.
More of a question, would this be what Peyo's operation would be considered?
Peyo's operation, as far, I've never been there to visit. I've only talked about it and this and that, and Claire probably knows more about it than I do. But the way I understand Peyo's operation is a large parcel of land, and different people can, when they join the co-op, they have access to that kind of land and shared equipment and shared knowledge and that kind of thing. But I don't think there's any neighborhoody kind of thing involved.
Yeah, that's accurate.
So on the surface, there could be many positives here to an agri-hood, you know, access to fresh local foods at that too. And people in the neighborhood are getting together and deciding the direction of the farm and what's acceptable to use and what's not acceptable to use and what should be growing. So you got this instant community around your agri-hood. Any more positives folks can think about agri-hoods?
I'm just not completely familiar with them, so I can't really
Very honest answer. Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm glad I'm able to get you thinking about it though. The negative side of agri-hoods is much like the same of those houses that are built around the golf courses or those houses that are built around those lakes, is they all tend to be, you know, higher end, upper middle class kind of houses, and often very white at that too. And as long as you have enough money, you get to participate in the agri-hood. But if you don't, and from my point of view, especially through that Hayes Farm lens and pay what you can model and all this, where we're trying to make good food accessible to folks that otherwise would have barriers to accessing these kind of things, this doesn't address that at all. This is good food for rich folk, you know? And so that would be the downside. That would be my cons to these agri-hoods. But I mean, not a terrible concept.
Which I guess is like what I was kind of getting from what you're talking about. I'm not really keen on like man-made lakes either. I don't like oh, let's just build a lake, like and have people live around it. You know, like I guess I'm very much of like a naturalist as far as like find a place that's more opportune for developing a farm that has all the things that you need. You don't need to like start digging holes in the ground to, you know, create more sustainable communities for rich folk, I guess.
Killarney Lake, north of Fredericton, from what I understand, is a man-made lake, just trying to provide more green space and swimming opportunities and fishing opportunities to folks around. Positive, negatives around that too, I guess.
Not to mention,
Not to mention what, Matt?
the head pond, Mactaquack.
Yeah. First of all, so my overarching thing here I'm trying to get at is kind of describing the Hayes Farm journey. There's the New Brunswick Community Harvest Garden that was already established. So as soon as Hayes Farm started up, we had that nonprofit status. And I think it's definitely a positive for us and able to give us legitimacy and access funding. But it's probably, you know, not 100% necessary. You probably can start up a community farm without nonprofit status, but it might be more challenging, especially for folks to kind of take you serious. And then another important thing that was done early on in 2018 was the Hayes Farm crowdfund. And the crowdfund is important not only for the funds that it generates, of course, but it also brings a community together. And it also demonstrates to other folks, say like the government and of different levels, are they talking municipality or provincial or federal, it shows that there is support for your idea and your endeavor and that people are willing to put their own money into it. Claire was the one that spearheaded that the Hayes Farm crowdfund in the early days. And do you want to talk about that and how it mobilized community and what you think the impact was?
Yeah, so we've run 2 campaigns. So just, I guess, to give a brief overview, a lot of people have heard of, you know, GoFundMe is a pretty popular platform, but the idea behind a crowdfund campaign is very much storytelling, with a call to action at the end of to raise money to get donations from supporters, whether they're, you know, in your immediate kind of regional community or beyond. So that first campaign, I forget what we called it, but we launched it in 2018 with a quite a large goal of raising $30,000, and we were incredibly successful. It took quite a bit of legwork at the beginning to set it up and make sure that we had, you know, a good story to tell, compelling story, with an ask that people could, you know, get on board with and identify with. And a big part of that was engaging partners and community members to help us tell that story, but also to help kind of spread the word on the campaign and kind of help advocate for us by telling their own story or you know, relating to it in the way that made sense for them. So the cool thing about crowdfunding campaigns, or at least the platform we use, is called Chuffed. It's actually based out of Australia. but they have a really, really good support team. And they kind of walk you through all the steps, and it can be a really, really good tool to get a bit of a cushion of funding. And typically the way that they are presented are very project based, so that the money you're raising is for this specific thing, as opposed to a big overall project. And so we exceeded our goal in our first campaign, and then we launched a second campaign basically a year later, with trying to share the successes of the first one, and then asking for funds, but for different aspects of the project. And not surprisingly, the second campaign has been a bit harder of a sell. I'll share. Can I share my screen? No.
I can make that happen. Go ahead.
Thank you.
And as I was saying, like a successful crowdfund campaign gives legitimacy to your operation. It shows that other folks on a grassroots level is involved and invested.
So I'm going to search the first one here. So the platform.
While you're getting set up there, I am in the chat window there because of that crowdfund campaign showing the folks at our grassroots level are involved and invested. That gives you more legitimacy, especially with the nonprofit status, to then reach out to other organizations to seek funding. And in the chat window here, I am putting up all the different places that we have received funding from over the years there, just in case you guys are interested.
Yeah, so the page that I'm showing now is the first one that we did. And so the way that it's laid out, like I said, it's very much storytelling oriented. And you can always update it. So here at the top, it says, our funding has been successful, and it hasn't been updated since I don't know when. So it's very out of date, but it still tells the story. And this one was it had perks with it. So you can, depending on the platform and depending on how you decide to design your campaign, you can kind of associate, you can basically give different rewards for the levels of donation. You try and have them be, have intrinsic value, as opposed to actually using the money that you've earned to then pay for something to give away. And the nice thing about this platform too is, like I mentioned, Shaft, though they're very remote from us, they're based in Australia. There probably is Canadian-based ones, that they don't take anything off the top. Basically, anybody who's contributing or making a donation, they can then elect to give extra dollars, whether it's $1 or $5 or $10, to the platform for their operating costs. So you actually get 100% of the donations that are given through the Trust platform. And so that is the one that we did in our first year.
I love that sepia tone picture of the Idaho horse there.
And then this is the one that is currently live, and we have an NBCC business admin student currently doing a practicum with us. He just started last week, but he's with us for 5 weeks, and one of the things that he's focusing on is how to revive this current campaign, because you can see that we have a total of $25,000, and we've actually decreased that from what it initially was, and we've raised almost exactly half of that. And this campaign has been live now for 2 years, so it's very much stagnant. But I won't play the video, but so again, it just tells our whole story, and it is really nice way to engage community and help get support. But it's something that needs to be considered quite carefully, and the storytelling needs to be done quite done in a way that you're very thoughtful about what you're asking for and what you're asking people to contribute.
I was just kind of looking at my notes here as Claire was talking, and was something I wanted to point out as we're talking about nonprofit status and nonprofit organizations is that the name itself, nonprofit, is perhaps a little bit of a misnomer because nonprofits should make a profit. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I mean, a successful nonprofit is indeed making a profit. What the difference is in the for-profit world, at the end of the year, when your business, company, whatever is showing a profit, that is often paid out as dividends to either the shareholders or most often the higher up folk, right? The executives often get bonuses at the end of the year. Whereas with a nonprofit, you should be making a profit at the end of the year, but then that gets reinvested into the business to further your impact. But a nonprofit should, when you're designing the books and whatnot, your nonprofit should make a surplus and should, in theory, make a profit. I wanted, and speaking of profit and monies and that kind of stuff, I wanted to kind of break down a bit of the money kind of side for you. As I previously have mentioned, we're aiming to produce around $35,000 to $40,000 of produce this year at Hayes Farm. And I was looking at expenses spent on the farm in 2020. And roughly we were looking at about $18,000 of overheads between, buying in different gear and tools and irrigation equipment and compost and various things, straw and various inputs that we bought in, and all those different small tools like tuck tape and hand tools and you name it. Our expenses there in 2020 were about $18,000. So whereas we are aiming to make about $40,000, about half of that is going to get eaten up in expenses. And that is not even including salaries and wages. That is just tools and your inputs into your farm. So you're looking at approximately about $20,000 of net at the end of the day, or at the end of the year, maybe. But then you also have to factor in that pay what you can model. Even though we're aiming for $40,000 of retail produce prices, and that pay what you can model, we're perhaps receiving about half of that. So if you're looking at the numbers alone there, that produce certainly is significant, but and important, but it's certainly not going to float the bills here at Hayes Farm in and of itself. And so then another revenue stream that we have going besides the produce is, of course, education revenue. And again, in 2020, looking at 2020 numbers, we grossed around $20,000 in education revenue monies through those different courses that I just outlined. But out of that, after you're calculating expenses, again, we're looking at about half of that as net. So we're looking at about a $10,000 net out of a $20,000 gross that we brought in for education. And so if you add up your different nets there, from the net profit from the produce and the net profit from the education, you're looking at about 10,000 plus 10,000. And still, that's not enough to cover wages and salaries for Hayes Farm's core staff, which is Claire, Matt, and I as the core staff. Carol was on payroll last year. She's just operated on a volunteer basis this year. Is that correct, Claire?
For now, yeah, we're still working to figure it out, but yeah.
Yep. And we're always trying to figure these kind of things out. Pedal, good one, Matt. I didn't include that one on my list, and let me add that.
And Free Nations education, that's pretty huge.
Nope, I thought I had that, but I didn't, obviously.
Matt, when you say pedal, are you thinking like the Future Wabanaki and Future Ready New Brunswick?
Yeah, both the future programs are funded through pedal.
And then Jedi has actually also been a supporter in not maybe direct funds to Hayes Farm, but in supporting folks to take our programming. So that is another supporter as well there. Anything else I missed there, guys, in the supporter?
Maybe a couple other small ones, but those are definitely the big ones.
All right, and I'm trying to update my list as I go, which I'm going to send to you, Matt, at the end of the day here, so you can update your notes. All right, so I got lots more questions to ask everybody, but we're running out of time. But the question I want to put out to everybody to think about is it possible to have a prosperous farm, we're going to say for-profit farm, and respect the environment at the same time? because
Hopefully.
right, that's my answer as well. But in practice, like, what do you picture when you picture like a profitable farm? Are you picturing something that looks like Hayes Farm, or are you picturing something that looks like the potato farms up north in NB?
I guess maybe we have to redefine what like prosperous means.
Awesome. What a great answer. And I completely agree with that. And that North American point of view of what prosperous is just comes down to like the dollars and cents at the end of the day. I want you to take a look at this picture. And this picture, I'll fully admit, was a road I was going down and had grave doubts about and got out of this kind of business. We used to have a tractor that looked much the same as that tractor, except ours was a Zetor tractor. But here you have an operation that is an organic farm, a certified organic farm. And they're heavily involved in plastic culture. Like, take a look at that farm, and each and every one of those rows has black plastic laid down on top of it. And I use my fair share of black plastic. But I only used it, I'm just me trying to justify myself now here. I've only used it in the kind of like an acre kind of scale, let alone like apparently in California, like there are fields and fields and fields of plastic culture farms that you cover your entire field in plastic. Here's a picture. Oh, and they won't let me look at it. Enter your email address. I think I am on there. Oh, I don't know. Anyways, I'm not going to bother with that right now. But you can see this picture here in the background here. Again, that's a plastic culture farm. And the one above it, at least, they were cover cropping in between with some sort of vegetation. This one here is just bare dirt with plastic being laid, and it's a very stark kind of place. And this is a profitable certified organic farm. And I don't think enough folks that are buying certified organic stuff realize what that whole plastic culture part of the picture is. I think a lot of folks that are buying certified organic just at the grocery store without looking into where this is actually coming from are picturing these nice, happy kind of places. And instead, these are the kind of places that certified organic produce is coming from, with all this plastic culture going on. And just like we had that picture of earthbound organics up with all that irrigation going on and diversion of water, where their farm is nice and green and looks very healthy, yes, but the surrounding landscape is parched. And yesterday, when we were talking about that working with water lecture, we were talking about your farm not being an oasis. We were talking about your farm being a bigger picture of an ecosystem and a bigger picture of a watershed. And the healthier the ecosystem and watershed is around you, the healthier your farm is going to be. And ideally, in theory, lessen your need to import water and redirect water to the farm. But too often, oh, I wanted to go there. Too often on for-profit organic farms, they're doing all of these different practices which make them money, yes, but aren't necessarily great for the environment. I think one of the worst things that happened in the certified organic movement is the national standards that Canada adopted sometime in maybe the late 90s, perhaps. No, I think it was early 2000s when Canada adopted their certified organic standards. As soon as you have national certified organic standards, then you have a baseline, right? You have this baseline of what it takes to achieve your organic certification. Then you have these big companies get in and they are trying to do the lowest they possibly can to achieve that organic certification in order to obtain as much money as they can from the end consumer by charging a premium for their certified organic goods. And the original movement of certified organic, I don't think they had in mind these big plastic culture operations. They had in mind more healthy farms, kind of what we're doing at Hayes Farm. But as soon as that became national and had these standards, you have companies moving in and trying to do as little as they can to complete, like at Hayes Farm, are trying to complete all the different loops, trying to close all those different loops at the farm. That's the reason we have this comfrey coming in, which they tell me is supposed to arrive at my place tomorrow. We're trying to grow our own mulch into the future to supply those, so we don't have to buy in the mulch, and we're trying to produce our own compost so we don't have to buy in so much compost. And these are all things we're working towards. And that's kind of the ethics of the certified organic movement that I'm familiar with, not the ethics of this whole plastic culture thing that is intensive, but profitable at the same time. To be honest, I don't know of a ton of farms that straddle the line really well between prosperous and respecting the environment at the same time, if you're viewing it through that lens, like Julia was saying, of what is profit, what is wealth, and what is prosperity. If you view it just from, and corporations are viewing it just from that bottom line money kind of dollars and cents kind of point of view, but individuals operate on a smaller level can redefine what is prosperous and what is profitable to them. And as a result, though, there's a lot of organic farmers out there that are living lifestyles that a lot of folk would call, alternative lifestyles. And I've been down that road myself too. And I've got kids and family and this and that, and they go to school with all the other people that are, they go to school with all the other kids that have, the traditional values of our traditional capitalist society that we live in. And my kids, for some part, there's a little bit of pushback about this alternative lifestyle that I've kind of forced onto them. And that's something that we work through at home all the time. I'm getting to Tom's comments here. It's true that certified organic plants can be sprayed until a certain size and then flushed out and grown as organic. I'm not entirely sure about that one. I guess it depends on, I like Claire's answer there. I guess it depends on your certified organic body. There's different bodies that will certify your farm, and you need to have conversation. If you are certified organic, you'll be having a conversation with these kind of folks. And in some cases, perhaps that is true. I might have mentioned this one already, but I know that there is loopholes in the organic certification regulations where they say for like cattle operations, for like dairy cattle, for example, your dairy cattle under certified organic regulations should be out on pasture, should be out on green grass. But if you can prove that releasing your cattle onto this pasture and onto this green grass is going to be detrimental to the environment, for whatever reason, then there's loopholes saying that you can keep your cattle indoors. And I know there's corporations that have taken advantage of those loopholes and have grown their head of cattle to such a size, and giant barns in such a size that to release all of these cattle outside is going to be detrimental to their environment. So they keep them all inside, and they're still able to retain their organic certification. Which is nuts. Same thing with organic meat chickens. Organic meat chickens are grown very similar to non-organic chickens in that you have a barn and you have a sea of chickens. Under organic certifications, they have to have access to the outside, which looks like a barn door that's open. But those chickens have no inclination of going outside. They just sit inside with all the other chickens. And especially if you're that chicken on the far end of the barn and you got to go through this entire sea of chicken bodies in order to get outside, it just doesn't happen. And so, you get that rub between what the certified organic movement was supposed to be and what it is, and it's all just kind of based around profit. That being said, though, we've hit the magical 11 o'clock hour. If anybody has any other questions about what we do at Hayes Farm and how we do it, please voice that. Oh, one more thing I wanted to put out there was there is a how to start a community farm handbook that is available online on the hayesfarm.ca website. Do you want to talk about that real brief, Claire?
Yep. I think that hopefully it's on a few folks' radars already. I know Tom Boyce is aware of it, but we put together, it hasn't been updated in a year now, but we've basically put together this handbook, we're calling it, of kind of how we've got to where we are, which might help answer some of your earlier questions, Ali. But it's basically about, you know, why we're doing what we're doing, how we've gotten here, what's worked for us, what hasn't, and that kind of thing. And I think my biggest takeaway from this conversation, which I hope continues over the course of the season for sure, but is, you know, the community farm model in our perspective is so much about networking and about collaboration, and just realizing that it's kind of a maybe frustrating or difficult thing to realize or lesson to learn, but things certainly don't always happen when you want them to happen. And if you think of a collaborator or a partner that you think would be such a good fit, and you start conversations, oftentimes it's just like the timing is off, and so things don't happen right away. But, you know, staying true to your values and putting your intentions out there, and eventually if it is the right thing or the right partnership or the right idea, that eventually that will probably come back around and will be able to, you know, be played out. Yeah, so that's my summary of the community farm for now anyways. But that how to start your community farm handbook, I think, is a really I mean, I'm biased, but I think it's a really good resource that is on the I don't know what page it's on, but again, it is also on our website. It's downloadable as a PDF.
Any other questions before we wrap? And the one other big thing I wanted to talk about that will probably get carried over to the next housekeeping session on Thursday morning is the labor piece. And there's lots to be talked about in labor. That's always your most major expense on a farm, whatever kind of scale that you're operating at. And we can start talking about migrant labor and all those kind of good issues the next time there. Next Thursday for housekeeping, we'll spill over a little bit and we'll keep discussing this topic a little bit more. But that's it for now. Thanks for hanging in there, fellas. And hopefully I'll see you on farm soon. Dallas, you got something else?
You're muted, my friend.
I just want to ask a quick question about the corn and the beans. So we don't gotta like keep the whole class here. If they want to leave, it's okay. Yeah, I was just kind of curious about planting my corn and my beans and the squash, because I'm gonna have three sisters settings in my backyard. I'm gonna dig them all out. I'm just curious if it's like an okay time of year to plant the corn in ground right now.
It's a dicey one, right? So typically, if we're talking about like the risk of frost, right? Corn, beans, and squash don't like frost. And typically I would wait until the full moon in June comes and goes, because a full moon in June will often bring frost. Except this year, the full moon in June doesn't occur until late June. So that's not a great indicator this year. Looking at the forecast for the next little bit, the forecast seems to be relatively all right for the overnight lows. It doesn't look like there's a chance of frost, but that could change too. I still think it's a little bit early to be putting out corn and beans and squash directly into the ground. Myself, what I like to do is I start corn indoors, and we did that last week. I think, as a matter of fact, you started seeding that last week. And there's a couple of reasons why I like to start corn indoors. One is to get to the head start before you transplant out, which isn't entirely necessary. But the other reason is rodents and birds and raccoons, they all love corn in the ground. And when your corn is in as a seedling, when you transplant your corn in as opposed to direct seeding it, those seedlings don't seem to be touched half as much as your corn itself. So if you got a problem with squirrels and raccoons and birds and those kind of things, sometimes you're better off to germinate it indoors and then bring it out. As far as direct seeding outdoors, which is entirely possible, I would still delay into June myself. I think it's a little dicey right now, and a little dicey in terms of last frost, and a little dicey in terms of soil temperature. Corn and beans and squash all like to germinate in warmer temperatures. You can take that soil thermometer that we have at Hayes Farm and jab it into the dirt, and or even bring it home overnight and jab it into your soil and see what the temperature is of your soil. and then reference with like that Johnny's website and find out what the ideal temperature is for germinating corn and see if you're close. That would be an indicator there. As I was saying though, the long-term forecast, the overnight lows look extremely good all the way into June. Here's all the overnight lows, and we're quite warm for this time of year for the overnight lows. However, I have seen these long-term forecasts change dramatically as we get closer, and they'll change this 9 to a 3, and that could be a chance of a frost. And then so you're risking that a little bit. So yeah, it's a little dicey. You got any thoughts there, Claire, yourself?
Agree with everything you just said. The corn in the greenhouse already is up like an inch or two, just fast. Yeah.
So fast. So yeah. So that's what I got to say about that.
But
Dallas.
and you probably, Dallas, you're probably like an hour north of, I mean, an hour, I know an hour is not a distance, but an hour north of where we are, you're probably even a little bit cooler still than where we are down here. So
I guess as far as like planting my corn, do I plant my corn and then later on in the year am I planting my squash and my beans, or so?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's another advantage of starting the corn indoors is when you transplant out your corn seedlings. At that time, you can direct seed squash with it because it has a head start. But you want that corn to have a head start before your beans and before your squash, because if they're started at the same time, the beans will outgrow the corn, and yeah, they'll have nothing to climb. Therefore, your timing's not great. And three sister planting does come down to timing.
Like a head start, or are we talking here like a couple of weeks, or just like is it based on like how high the plants have kind of established themselves?
Yeah, a little bit of both. A couple of weeks sounds about appropriate, and by that time, your corn should be, between ankle and knee height, let's say, and that would be a good time to put in those beans and allow them to grow. I'm trying to think. I can't quite remember. It was corn. Was it corns and then beans and then squash, or was it corn then squash and beans?
I would think beans before squash, but I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
I would think so too. I always thought corn and then wait a couple of weeks and then beans and then put those squash in. And those squash could be started indoors ahead of time too. Not too many people start beans ahead of time. Cecilia, however, is a fantastic resource for these kind of things as well. And Cecilia, from previous conversations, she'll often wait into June, so for all chance of that frost and cool soil to be done before planting her three sisters.
So I guess I have a few varieties of the corn that Cecilia was nice enough to let me have, but I'm just curious about cross-pollination between those indigenous varieties. Is that something that I'm going to have to worry about, like primarily in my backyard?
Do you want to save your own seed?
I would love to save my own seed. Yeah.
All right. So cross-pollination is certainly something that you will have to be concerned about. Usually, if you're growing different varieties of corn and you're harvesting them all in the same year and you're not concerned about seed saving, they will all produce true. They will cross-pollinate, but they'll all produce pretty much what you were expecting them to produce for this year. But then if you were to plant those seeds the next year, you might get a whole new corn variety because of that cross-pollination. Mm-hmm. Now, this is something that we will be visiting again sometime soon. And we started going down this road last year, but we weren't wildly successful with keeping our corn varieties true. But picture an ear of corn as it grows. You have these silk tassels that come out of the top of the ears of corn. And at the very top of that corn plant, you have what's called the tillers, and that's your male part. And that's like the flowers that grow out of the very top bit of the corn. And so those male flowers will release pollen, and the silks that are coming out of the ears, that's your female part. And each and every individual silk that's coming out of the ear is attached to an individual grain of corn, which I find amazing. So for every corn that is in your ear, each and every one of them have a silk that comes out of that top of the ear, and they're waiting to be pollinated. Your corn actually won't plump up until it's pollinated. We were talking about this with poor pollination of cucumbers and poor pollination of tomatoes. Plants won't put the energy into producing full seeds unless they're pollinated. So typically with corn, you got your male part, your male flowers coming out of the top. They release pollen, and the pollen attaches themselves to those individual silks, and which then pollinates that corn. So if you are looking to produce corn to like true for the seed for the next year, there's things that you can do in order to prevent the cross pollination. And one of those things is, first of all, you got to collect that pollen yourself. So you're looking at putting a paper bag over top of the tassels. And that will collect the pollen for you. It won't have a chance to disperse into the environment. You're collecting that pollen yourself. And the mistake we made last year is we were just using straight up like brown paper bags, but they need to be a waxed paper bag because the pollen all adheres to the brown paper, and you end up with these clumps of pollen, and it's very hard to then fertilize your ears. So that's the first step is you, when those tillers first appear out of that, the top of your corn, you want to put a wax paper bag over top of it. And we have some at Hayes Farm that you can probably even take home. And then when that pollen is being released, you kind of turn it over and you give it a shake and you collect this pollen inside the wax bag. And then you're taking that pollen and you're sprinkling it on top of those corn silks. Then after you're done doing that, oh, and that's another thing too. So you got a paper bag over top of the tassels, and you also have a paper bag over the silks because you don't want other corn in the area or other corn to pollinate those silks. So you got a paper bag over the tassels where you're collecting the pollen, and you got a paper bag over the silks where you're preventing those corn silks from being pollinated until you yourself goes and takes that pollen and puts it onto those tassels. And then you got your true corn that way. And
Okay.
we'll spend some more time in class talking about that. And you certainly got time. You don't have to worry about tassels for at least another month or more. So you certainly got time between now and then. So yeah, start growing it, and then we'll catch up and we'll talk more about how to collect that pollen and hand pollinate those silks.
I'm almost considering like just growing a single variety in the backyard. Because the location that I'm in, it's actually surrounded by trees.
Okay.
So I'm not really worried about other pollen from other like types of corn coming in, just because we are fairly like closed in and boxed in. But
The radius, I mean, they will cross pollinate over like kilometers though, right?
yeah. That's what I mean is like the coverage I have is quite thick around the house. So I don't know, like hopefully the trees will act as some sort of like filtration, like barrier for catching pollen or anything like that.
A quick little Google search here from an Ohio university says corn pollen grains has been known to travel as far as a half mile with just a 15 miles per hour wind gust in just a couple of minutes.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks.
No props. We'll talk more about that in the future. Oh, my phone's ringing again.